Land in places land should not be. Let's get this over with. This will be a very long video, more on that in a second. Let's get the intro done though. So it seems like maybe a lot of you out there didn't pick up what I was putting down, so let me clarify here. Now, this video is only part 1, as you saw from the title, so because we have a total of 27 islands to talk about in both parts here, we're going to take this video, see what we're going to do, and we're going to snip it in half. We're going to do 2 parts of it, so hopefully you like islands, because... Oh, and one more thing, some of these segments may be shorter or longer than others depending on the information that I can find about them, so hopefully you can just remember that if one segment is only, maybe like a 30 seconds or something, but, one whole slide is like, I don't know, 2 minutes long maybe. The chances of that happening are probably slim, but, you can never be too safe. Antarctica! Get used to seeing this map a lot because it's one of the main ones we're going to be working with. This is a kind of top-down view of Antarctica in the center, and there's South America, well, technically the bottom tip of Chile and Argentina in the kind of northwest corner there, and that green blob at the top, like at the very top, at the center, is the bottom half of Africa, the very bottom half of South Africa. So this will give you a sense of just how remote these places are. You should probably get remembering of the names of these places, or not, because, they'll be here for you, but just in case. By the way, yes, if you're looking through here and saying to yourself, boy, these seem really remote, useless, cold, and unheard of, then you'd be right, because they are. Peter the First Island is a small frozen island owned by Norway despite it being on the other side of the planet. It has one of those Antarctic volcano things on it and is only really around 60 square miles in size. That's really tiny. It was discovered in 1821 by the Russians who were cruising around the joint since at the time Antarctica was mostly unexplored. They named it after the legend himself, Peter the Great, the god he is, and claimed it for Russia. In 1931, the Norwegians came by again, and they used the spot to do anything ranging from hunting whales to, well, that was about it. And then in 1932, the island was officially claimed for Norway. And also, I don't know if the Russians did in response, clearly not much since the island is still Norwegian. It has nobody living on it since it's in just about the absolute worst place to exist or make a settlement. In fact, that's the only real life here is lichens, adelies, petrels, terns, and fulmars. You wouldn't have known what those were if I didn't have the images. Just what the heck is a South Shetland? These islands here. Named after the Shetland Islands above Scotland, remember that if you forget where any of these islands are in the video, thumb back to the map in the beginning. Anyhow, they're administered by the British, and they have a land area approximately 1.4 thousand square miles. In 1819, along with the British, US President JQA himself heard of the discovery of the islands and was like, yes, get us there, now. And so we did. Us and the Brits teamed up to go club seals to death on the other end of the Earth on a frozen-over archipelago, hand in hand. Much later on, a research base was built there, and the population is around 550 people, mostly British and Chileans. Sea gamers, the British Empire does live on, just in places where owning land doesn't matter. The two countries have controversies as to who actually owns the islands, but frankly, I'm just glad the two are using the islands for research and nature and not killing more water dogs. Due to the island's extremely close proximity to the long peninsula that comes off mainland Antarctica, the islands are home to the usual gang you'd expect here, like penguins, seals, migratory seabirds, algae, and lichens. Boom. Next. The South Orkney Islands, pictured here, owned by Britain of course, are 240 square miles in land area, much smaller than the previous. They were jointly discovered in 1821 by the British and Americans for some reason, who were using the islands and their waters for whaling, wheeling, sealing, and dealing. The chronicle picks up in 1904 when the Orcadas research base was constructed on this island over here, claimed by Argentina at the time, hence the Spanish name. In 1962, however, the UK robustly pulled a Rule Britannia and claimed the islands as their own, much to Argentina's chagrin. The only real life you'll find here, other than the ones I've already mentioned a lot before, are mollusky things, delectable yummy gummy starfish, and moss. But what's it like being here? Well, it's wet and really cold, so think of it this way. Being here is like perpetually being in a cold shower, except thousands of miles away from everyone you know and love on an island that most people probably will never get to. Cold shower doesn't seem so bad now, does it? South Georgia is the bigger island on the left, and the South Sandwich Islands are on the right. They're owned by guess who, and their land area is about 1,500 square miles, so a bit more girth than the norm. South Georgia was claimed in 1775, and the South Sandwich Islands in 1908, a full 133 years apart. Despite the two being a little less than 500 miles apart from one another, which to the British Navy would be nothing, but I digress. It was first spotted in 1675 by a British sailor, and like I said before, when they were claimed in 1775, it was by legendary British explorer James Cook, who had a habit of discovering places. In 1786, they were used as sealing spots, just like everything else. However, they were notoriously hard to get to since the waves around these parts are extremely choppy and dangerous and often resulted in shipwrecks. Later on, around the turn of the century, they were used as a whaling location. Then the settlement Grytviken was built from the ground up in 1904. The settlement became famous because of the frequent visits by Ernest Shackleton on his Antarctic exploration voyages. When he died, he even got to be buried there. In 1966, Grytviken was abandoned and was mysteriously gone, and all of its people. Just kidding, we actually know what happened to it. It's because around when 1966 happened, killing whales for commodities fell out of fashion, and as a result, the entire settlement became basically unprofitable and useless. But what happened to the South Sandwich Islands? They're tiny and useless and has nothing redeeming. South Georgia is a bit more north than the others, so it has a bit more life to it, like grasses, moss, ferns, and whatever club moss is. They even have birds and imported reindeer. Isn't that nice? Bouvet Island is a very tiny, isolated, frozen-over glacial hellhole of an island in the middle of nowhere in an ocean owned by Norway. Of course, Britain had a problem with this and tried to claim it, but Norway actually won this one and yeeted out the Brits. It's quite small, only measuring in at 19 square miles. It was discovered in 1739 by the French, who were in the area and discovered it after sailing around a bit. However, things pick up in 1808 when a separate attempt to land on the island was made, but failed. In 1825, Britain claimed ownership over it, but not without taking the lives of a few seals, of course. Silly goofballs. All was well until 1927, when Norway arrived, saw an opportunity, and said, "Hey, who cares?" and hoisted up the Norwegian flag proudly. Britain got mad and was like, "Yo, that's our desolate, useless island whose ownership doesn't matter and contributes nothing to the world or our global economy." Norway didn't give a single hoot, and Britain reluctantly dropped it after some debating. Unfortunately, in 1909, it was integrated into Norwegian control, probably to Britain's dismay. A bit later, Norway even built a shack on the island for some reason. I can't imagine this being terribly useful, probably because nobody lives here, or probably could ever live here. The Norwegians saw the seals, squinted their eyes, and protected the seals for once. Yay, good for them, the seals live in this tale. In 1971, the island was designated as a nature reserve. Not this happy-go-lucky kind, I'm talking about this barren, icy, dreary kind. The island is volcanic like most other islands in the Antarctic and has all the same animals as usual, like moss, lichens, birds, and seals. But hey, at least they have, orcas? +1 points. The Prince Edward Islands, owned by South Africa this time, are made up of two main islands. There's Marion Island and, Prince Edward Island. Yeah, they weren't too creative here. They're around 130 square miles in size, and they were discovered in 1663 by the Dutch, but that didn't really work out and nothing came of it. In 1799, the French got to them, and the seals started to disappear soon after, conveniently. They actually landed, unlike the Dutch before them, and started making a few shacks and pots and stuff. However, in 1803, the Americans got to them for whatever reason, and noticed that there were some artifacts there left from before. Now, we all know that Britain likes colonizing random islands, so when South Africa was their colony, the UK allowed them to build a weather station there on Marion Island in 1947. Even after South Africa got independence in 1961, they still technically operated it using not, for the just weather, but also for the animals living there. In fact, in 2013, South Africa made the islands and their surrounding waters one big nature reserve. Good job. No permanent people live there, but around 50 scientists live there from time to time, making me have this really goofy image in my head. Animal segment. The islands have all the same stuff as all the others on the list, but here's a few more weird things. They used to have one bad mouse problem invading the islands, brought over some from ships, so they brought cats in to eat them. Unfortunately, while it did work, cats breed like cats and filled up the place. Scientists knew that they had to do something immediately so the cats don't kill off everything on the islands, so they decided to start a cat slaying program by which they purposefully gave cats cat-specific viruses. That didn't work because of just how many cats there were, and even though it probably gave them some nasty effects, they had to do something. So they just decided to get people in and start shooting them, with the scientific method, of course. These puppies here do be the Crozet Islands owned by France. They're 136 square miles, which is how you know they're legit. They were discovered in 1772 by a French sailor who I guess was just playing around in the area, I would think. Just kind of sailing around there, I guess. Side note, by the way, he eventually washed up in New Zealand, where the natives killed him and ate him. So, Anyhow, in the early 1800s, say it with me now, they were used for sealing, but so much to the point where the animals there almost went extinct. So it was used for whaling then, but the animals there were regularly killed so much that in 1938, France saw all the stuff happening there and was like, look, you need to go. We aren't getting anything from you anymore, please leave, and promptly turned it into a nature reserve. In 1963, the first and only research base was constructed on this island with only a handful of people regularly staying in it, even now. Animals? Sure, why not? Due to their close proximity to the Prince Edward Islands, they have the same cat and mouse problem, except this time with pigs and goats? Goats? Goats! Yes! Welcome to Ile St. Paul and Ile Amsterdam. Owned by France, they're pretty small, with Ile Amsterdam weighing at only around 21 square miles in land area, and Ile St. Paul coming in at only around 2. Ile Amsterdam was discovered in 1522, while Ile St. Paul was found in 1559. In 1663, the Dutch tried to make it again, but failed, but it worked actually again in 1696 when they recorded landing for the first time. Also, I forgot to mention Ile St. Paul was discovered by the Portuguese, not the Dutch. By the time seal hunters got their mitts on the islands in the late 1700s, it was already too late for the seals. In 1871, settlers tried and failed to colonize the islands for two main reasons. One, nothing would grow, because I'm assuming probably the climate or the soil was too bad. I don't know, something happened. And two, the animals wouldn't really do much, so now the cows were just kind of loose on the island, hanging around, doing whatever, so it was pretty much useless to have them there. After that, in the 1920s, France tried to spur Ile St. Paul's existence by forcibly opening up a lobster canning site, which closed down soon after, probably because no one lives there. In 1949, the first and only research base was constructed on the island, with only about 28 people living there, but hey, fat dubski for them. For the animal thing we always do, mostly the same thing, birds, seals, But this time, however, they had a black rat population giving them trouble, so they decided to literally airdrop poison on them from the sky in 1997, which was so effective it literally killed off every black rat on the island. Y'all ain't ready for this. The Kerguelen Islands are also known as the Desolation Islands. Sounds pretty bleak. This messy lad here are the Kerguelen Islands, owned by France. They were discovered in 1772 by the French, and the seals, well, cough cough, uh, um, in 1840, the entirety of the islands were mapped out. They were so isolated it took 68 years to map it out in, a pretty small land area. That's pretty intense stuff. In 1892, the Germans were in the area and were kind of using the islands as their unofficial toy, and France had enough of getting screwed over. France was like, no, get out now. But France, us Germans, we need to, we need to be here. No, leave now. So, in 1949, however, the islands finally got their first legit settlement, which is, this. Don't know how to say it. It has about 100 people, complete with a theater, hospital, church, and even a bar to get wasted. Oh, who's that coming into the distance? It's of course the Kerguelen cabbage. This native plant to the islands has provided nourishment for sailors here for centuries. Animal-wise, they got the whole crew, plus trout, cats, reindeer, the whole squad. I forgot to mention the land area. It's a little less than 2.8 thousand square miles. The Heard and McDonald Islands, owned by Australia, are a small group of frozen Antarctic islands. Strange how a place that looks like this can own a place that looks like this. But hey, small world, I guess. They're 142 square miles and were discovered in 1853 by an American sailor of who the islands are named after. They were first landed on, however, in 1855, and soon after, the seal population on the islands packed their bags and took a long trip. Side note, the McDonald Islands is the tiny island cluster on the far left over there, and were only first reached by helicopter in 1971. The islands were given to Australia by the UK in 1947 as part of Australia's growing independence. That's pretty much it. Now all you can see on the islands are the remains of a bygone seal slaying age, along with the occasional seabird or moss or, of course, seal. Macquarie Island is owned by Australia and measures 49 square miles in land area. It was discovered in 1810 and claimed for Britain but Polynesians likely reached it long before as evidenced by a wreck on the island. In 1820, a Russian explorer fully mapped out the island and claimed it for the Tsar. The sealing business was also started up, and so many seals were killed that they nearly went extinct. Eventually, this guy from New Zealand in the early 1900s started an oil business on the island. Oh, like fossil fuel, you might ask? No, not at all. He'd take a penguin, get out the machinery, grind it into a fine goo, and get the penguin oil. Let's move on. In 1911, the first meteorological station was built on the island, but that didn't work out, and by 1915 it was shut down. In 1933, the island finally became a protected nature zone. Thank God that nutjob from before couldn't get to it now. The animals from ships brought over invasively, like rabbits, cats, and rats, caused a huge issue for the island and had to be poisoned out of existence as well. That seems to be a popular thing on these islands. End of Antarctica. Parrot Dukes, Indian Ocean, and Oceania. Stay tuned. End of Part 1 of 3.